Let's go ahead and jump in because we were supposed to be done with intros by now. So let's do the brief intros in 30 seconds or less. Tom, you want to kick off?
Sure.
This intro?
Yeah, my name is Tom Jodeit. I work at Procore on our value consulting or value management team. So trying to help clients and prospects kind of build a business case for Procore. Prior to Procore, though, I was working for GCs, Skanska being one of them, Turner being another, and then worked as an owner's rep here in Austin, where I'm based, for a little bit as well.
Excellent, thank you. Ken.
Good afternoon, Ken Schneider with the United Association Education and Training Department.
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Ouellette, self-employed consultant, Austin, Texas. Mainly, I call myself Chief Progress Advocate because it's not always about technology. And I work mainly with Building Smart International and now the new US chapter. And I'm also working with AASHTO to help develop open standard-based BIM standards for bridges right now. So,
excellent. Michael.
Mike Niemer, Snohomish County. I'm a building plan reviewer here to kind of discuss the front end of what all the standards mean for a good plan set that would facilitate itself to a solid set of as-built at the end in the PDF world of things. And we have our own as-built kind of concerns. Might learn something here too to share with our engineering side for getting these documents into a stable as-built form.
Excellent, thank you. Rob.
Rob Fischer, Construction Users Roundtable. So I work with owner organizations on their capital projects. How can we improve that through safety, lean? I'm actually the staff liaison for technology and productivity, even though I'm not very smart. So I'm here to learn from all you bright folks.
I'm sure we're all getting better together, right?
Absolutely.
How about you, Nick?
My name is Nick Tilford. I'm the BIM VDC coordinator for the East Coast for Schuff Steel.
Thank you. Lisa?
Sorry, I was on mute. Lisa Neal with Skanska, USA Building.
Fantastic, thank you. Darren?
Darren Young, Director of Operations Technology at Hermanson Company up in Seattle, Washington area. We're a mechanical construction engineering and service company. Prior to that, my background is actually more manufacturing. I've worked for a variety of building product manufacturers over the years. So I've, for 20, 30 years, I've had my foot in both worlds.
Fantastic, thank you. The first of our subject matter experts today, Danielle, you want to give us a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Danielle O'Connell. I work for Skanska USA Building on our emerging tech team. So we're kind of being rebranded and trying to figure out where we fit. We are kind of an internal consulting team, although we work with a lot of clients externally as well, in trying to help folks understand which tools and technologies and processes they should be implementing throughout the project lifecycle. Prior to joining Skanska, I spent some time on the owner side, so I kind of wear both hats here. I worked for Bluebeam for a little bit, and other than that, have been on the GC side for most of my career. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis Ford. I work at Atrium Health, used to be called Carolina's Healthcare System until we started buying hospitals in Georgia. We had to change our name. We've got 40 to 50 hospitals. I can't keep track because we keep buying them. But I'm in charge of corporate facility management or plant operations support. We're currently building 3 new hospitals, I should say designing. We have over $1 billion worth of construction that we've kicked off. We're going to be renovating a few hospitals as well. I've been in the business for about 25 years, started in the Air Force at Eglin Air Force Base, Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Got out of healthcare for about 3 years, worked at USAA Insurance in San Antonio. I was a military brat, but I do claim San Antonio as home. But right now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thank you, Dennis. And then Jacob, you're kind of the glue that holds the rest of this conversation together. How about introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jacob Dalbora. I'm the BIM and FM director for McVeigh and Mangum Engineering. So we basically focus on 3 verticals of 3D scanning, VDC services, and BIM and integrated facility management handover. And there you go, short and sweet.
Thank you. My name is Kelly Doyle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for ProjectReady. We are a SaaS software solution that brings together multiple platforms within the industry, BIM 360, SharePoint, and the Microsoft and the like, Procore. And we're trying to de-silo the industry and bring things together, create a secure framework. So that's where we're coming from. So what I think I'd like to do is really first talk about the title of our topic today, if you will, digital twin, as-built dumpster diving. So before we get into what a dumpster diving really is, if Jacob, you could just give us a quick update on the last meeting and how it ties together with our topic that we're going to talk about today.
Of course. So last meeting was about the idea of the golden thread and what would be consistently data being used or collected during the whole construction and design process, and then gathered for the handover. We had a really good discussion on how designers should be collecting the data and then using it to hand to a contractor, or what we should be looking at as the end goal in the facility management side. But there was a gap in last week's or last month's conversation, and that was basically the GC side. We really didn't have much conversation about it. We really didn't talk too much about it. So we brought Danielle into the conversation, and she brought up the idea of dumpster diving. So we wanted to get this idea of how we go from a planning and design, and we're trying to collect data, but then how do we go into construction? And then Dennis, we brought him in, so he has experience with seeing all this come across and what he has seen in the past and what could it actually improve in the future.
Great segue. I appreciate that, Jake.
Of course.
So Danielle, first, I'm just going to leave this slide up for a second while we set the stage. What I'd like you to do is talk about what is dumpster diving from your perspective. It was a topic that you introduced, and Dennis, while she's describing that, if you could think about the follow-on question, which is, why does the owner of the FM care? What difference does this make? So I'm going to pull down the slide so we have a great discussion on the screen, but just kind of set the stage. Danielle, you want to start out?
Sure. So as part of our work, as I said, we're like an internal consulting group almost, but have a lot of VDC and BIM background. So what happens a lot at the end of a project, say like 6 weeks before we're about to turn a building over, we get asked to say, by the project team to say, hey guys, oh shoot, we just realized we have this requirement, and it's either an as-built model or it's a complete database that's going to be integrated with the client CMMS, and we take on the responsibility of helping our team, our Skanska team, collect all the build data, go through all of our submittals, and try to make sense of the information that we can collect. And we call it dumpster diving because oftentimes most of the team has moved on to another project at that point, and you're left with the suckers who are left, doing the closeout work. And so we're chasing them down, trying to understand and put the pieces together. We haven't necessarily been involved throughout the entirety of the project to have knowledge of all of the systems and assets that make up what we're putting together. So yeah, we've coined it dumpster diving, and we all said, oh, this is going to be another dumpster diving exercise. So that's where that came from.
Okay. So are there any particular challenges that you see that make dumpster diving need such a crass name? I mean, yeah, there's lots of information out there. Why is it dumpster diving and not just compiling information?
I think there's such a large amount of information that we're trying to search through. Simultaneously, we're trying to make sense of what are the owner's requirements, what are we actually trying to tackle out of all of that information. And as I said too, a lot of the team and the subject matter experts or whoever was in charge of like mechanical submittals, for example, has moved on to another project. It's near impossible to get them to kind of dive in with you. So it just becomes a challenge. And without that institutional knowledge of the entire history of the project, we are really searching through whatever materials were handed off, right? And sometimes we have to go back to subcontractors, and we don't have a relationship with them. They don't want to respond to us and try to gather some of that submittal data. So it's quite challenging.
Sounds like it. Now, Dennis, it sounds like you're on the receiving end of whatever you get from the folks who do the dumpster diving. How does that impact you guys?
I appreciate your candor, Danielle. Nobody's really taken that approach, although we feel it. Like I said, I've been in healthcare for 25 years, and I was in the insurance industry for 3. And USAA is over $1 billion company. It's the #1 company in San Antonio. It's a pretty nice place to work. And they had everything down pat. I mean, it ran like a machine until I started looking for documentation, you know. And I thought that was crazy because we were such a wonderful company. We had our act together. I inherited document management, and I thought I asked a very simple question. I just wanted to get an idea of where we were. So I went to the HVAC shop, and I asked one of the technicians to pull up some data. I wanted to see the operations manual for chiller number 4. And he just looked at me and said, I can't find it. And I said, well, you know, we've got this document management system. Can you just search on chiller number 4? And he couldn't find anything. I said, well, you know, chiller number 4 is in the south plant. Can you search on the south plant, see what we come up with? Couldn't find anything. So I went back to my desk. I was really dismayed. I really thought that was a simple question. I wasn't trying to set him up for failure. And I asked Victor, who had been there forever. He had been director of facilities at one time. I said, hey, Victor, can you find the O&M manual for chiller number 3? He says, oh, yeah. And I said, well, can you show me? He said, sure. And he pulled it up. I said, how did you do that? He said, well, John was the project manager. So I searched on John, and they installed it during the expansion of L-Wing. So all I had to do was search on John and L-Wing. And I'm like, why is the data not related to the actual piece of equipment or the real location of that piece of equipment? And maybe that's because, Danielle, somebody went dumpster diving and gave it to us. So what I found was a 2,000-page PDF document that was non-searchable. And so you had to go in, open up that document, and you had to go find the O&M manual for that chiller. So that's where I kind of decided we needed to make some changes. So yeah, it's very important to us because we need to understand how to operate the equipment that's installed. We need to understand how our buildings are built, understand where shut-off valves are in case we have leaks. And these things become extremely important in emergency situations. So to be able to not just put your hands on it, but put your hands on it in a quick manner. And unfortunately, that's why our older guys revert to paper. And so we have paper stored everywhere, and only they know where it is and how to get it. Nobody else does.
So this brings up an important question that sets the boundaries on either side, right? So the follow-on question really is, how and when do we address it? What's the appropriate time to make that happen?
Ideally for us, it's at the beginning of the project, and we have someone who can update and maintain the data and work with the owner to understand if those data requirements are changing. And that's data geometry, all of those things that we're collecting so that we can make sure that it's useful to them. And I think that every project that I've been involved in, that's not a conversation that's happening. The right people aren't being brought to the table to have that discussion. And that's why we're running into these, oh shoot, we have this requirement and we haven't paid attention to it. And now all of a sudden, you know, this unrealistic expectation to pull all of this data together that's critical, as Dennis said, to operating these buildings.
We're in a bit of a catch-22 because we definitely agree that we need to begin it at the beginning, but I think everybody brings their own perspective and their own background to the table. And all too often, I'm at the table and I see a lot of people shaking their head, yes, like, yes, we understand, Dennis, that this is what you need. Yes, we know, because we've been there. And so now the GC thinks they have an idea, the mechanical contractor thinks he has an idea. And quite honestly, we haven't always done a good idea of writing down our requirements. And so everybody has their own idea. And another thing we run into is everybody now seems to want to sell a solution. And so I know we've got some providers here on the call, And so we have engineers coming in with different software solutions. We have GCs. In fact, while we were talking, I just got an email from one of my GCs about a program called ViewOps. I've not seen ViewOps before. I had a conversation with ARC documentation last week. So a lot of different solutions out there. Nobody's really putting this thing together, but we have to take the time up front to actually write down the requirements and have all the right players at the table so that we understand what those requirements are.
So Rob, I think it ties into a question you just sent me through the chat is, where does it start? Does it start in the bidding process or what? Can you give me your thoughts there?
So that's the challenge we run into. If the bid package sent out by the owners, from my understanding and conversations with them, if it's too onerous, GCs are going to walk away. So if there are too many specifications, you have to do this, you have to use this, it can prevent bids from coming back. So it's a double-edged sword. If you put too many detailed instructions from an owner's perspective, and Dennis, you may agree with this or not, but you might lose some good bid opportunities with some of your contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. That's why we have to look at standardized protocols. So one place that I tackled this was at the University of Texas Medical Branch down in Galveston, who is skating the storm, maybe, I don't know, but I got there right after Ike hit them, and they were quite a mess. But we were using a CMMS package, a computerized maintenance management package called Maximo, which is a pretty big system throughout the industry. And our GC was using BIM 360. And so we discovered that we had a common platform in Kobe format. And so we started mapping that out from the very beginning on how could I get the data out of BIM 360 and into Maximo. Now, here I am at Atrium Health, which I feel like is really good at what we do. And we've got very strict BIM requirements, so the BIM model. And I'll just say on the user end, so as a maintenance person, we don't actually look at the model. So I'm more interested in extracting the data from the model. So quite honestly, if that's an issue with your company, maybe that BIM model requirement is too stringent, then maybe we do need to work on a different way of getting that data over into a system that I'm using that my guys can maintain.
So Nick, I see that head bobbing up and down a lot and firing off messages. What's your perspective on this?
Well, I come from a pretty jaded perspective, just because from the structural steel perspective, we're such an early trade in the process that sometimes, at least from my experience, a lot of our bread and butter, especially for the past 2 fiscal years, has been data halls for some of the top technology companies. Those data halls, the design is, BIM requirements tend to be very much a kick the can down the road kind of requirement, where they're subject to change and no one really owns the responsibility. So we're not getting directives from general contractors, contract documents, or our BIM execution plan, and they're subject to change. And because contractually we agree to document titles or just the BIM execution plan as a whole, when those revisions take effect, we tend to be, our feet are held to the fire, so to speak. A lot of what we do, our metadata is automatically integrated out of Tekla, which is what our company uses. But we are finding where benchmarking as-built submittals, such as mill certifications and cut lists and other material specs like that, we tend to just glob into a dumpster of a folder for submittal for closeout. So for us, because we're so early, we never really get the full picture.
Interesting. Which is something that you had brought up earlier, Darren, in the instant messages. Who has the time? We're going to get to some questions here in a second about what do we do about process or incentive changes to create win-win opportunities. But maybe you can set the stage with what you're seeing on who has the time to do it, and where does that incentive come from?
I don't know that I've got any good answers for that. I mean, it's like, software developers, documentation of code is the last thing people want to spend money on. And if money gets tight, that's where it gets pulled from. We see that, especially with COVID now, there's a lot of talk about how to get your building ready for occupancy and the mechanical trades. We're actually taking a pretty big hit on the service side because people are deferring maintenance and things like that. It just, people are so busy rushing to get what they need to get done. And a lot of times when people ask you for information, you don't get what you want. They hand you the dumpster. I don't know what you want. I don't have time to get you what you want. I'll just give you everything. So,
right.
We'll get from the engineer, we need this submittal on a particular balancing valve or a med gas valve, and it's buried in a 1,200 page document of, it looks pretty impressive to the owner. Look at our submittal, pretty robust. We give you all this information. It's like, I just needed one page. How do you find that?
Right, almost indexing that 1,200 page document so that way you can find what you need in there.
Tech searchability, done, solved.
Yeah, and there's no systems that manage. They're managed. In the manufacturing side, you talked about document management. There's nothing that manages the life cycle of documents across a project. I need some of the information the documents have. I don't need all the documents you have. You need some that I have. There's no way to leverage that internally across our enterprise that works well across multiple project partners. The project tools don't work well across the enterprise. And so we end up with all these files. I've never downloaded a spreadsheet or a PDF to book a flight or buy anything from Amazon. But yet that's how we run our projects. And there's really just there's some people that are, like Data is a product that, is doing things to try to help you find data in all these documents and all these separate, what do you call, it's unstructured data essentially.
Sure.
And somebody has to manage it. And even on the manufacturing side, the rule of thumb I always saw and heard was people don't understand the complexity of their own processes. Now you're going to put together a custom team with a custom product that you're going to build, and they're supposed to understand all the data and nuances of that. I mean, it's hard in manufacturing, and that's somewhat more controlled supply chain.
Darren, I learned a new term that maybe you've come across too. I shot this to the technology stack group, but the difference between complexity and complication or complicated. So a complicated system is understood, and a lot of like mechanical systems are very complicated, but you understand the inner workings of that system. That's what makes it complicated. Versus complex is, well, I don't know what I don't know. Like I don't know what's going to come at me. This whole A, E, and C, like I don't know what the A is going to do. I don't know what the E is going to do. That's complexity. So really separate our language between, are we talking about something that's complicated but understood, or are we talking about something that's complex and not fully understood? And now I'm going to leave. Good luck, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
I don't know where you were, but this is a great conversation.
Pull the pin out, roll that one on the floor for me, right? That grenade is going to go off here in a second. There's another piece of the puzzle here that we haven't talked about yet. And Mike, you brought it up earlier during the intros about figuring out how do you, as the authority having jurisdiction, how do you play in here and get inputs into the model early enough, and not the model, the 3D model, but maybe the process of, what's the right data for the right person at the right time? Can you kind of give us your take on how you guys fit in there?
Yeah, and it will vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction and what we look for and what we need to see. Just kind of more from the input side is, if you brought up those 1,200 page documents that aren't searchable. From a review perspective, for getting a permit out, having that document searchable helps us at the very beginning to get projects approved, to see what's involved. So honestly, everything that comes to us right now when we're in PDF form, the better it's put together and the clearer it is and the easier it is to search, the better job we can do of finding code issues and then getting the permit issued. So it would I would assume that would help set up the project for better success throughout, because now you have a better set of documents to work from. You have the right uncluttered, I guess, PDF that you can start utilizing the metadata behind and start tracking that information, put it all in one place. If something that we reviewed, say in a studio session, we use Bluebeam to review, worked well and everything was clear, if it can go into the project in another session and have everything there, documents are linked, maybe it's a project and that's where everything can live. You know, that helps too. When on these larger projects, our inspector comes out, they need to see a piece of information on a certain installation. It makes it a lot easier to find there too. So it kind of lend itself to, if the information is available throughout the project for everyone who needs it, might assume that it's easier to find everything at the end. If everyone's been looking at it, it's always in the same place and you have that mindset. Question being, from the operations standpoint, is will they look at things the same way as far as where to find information? So I think that's the best we can do, is try to encourage the best set of documents at the beginning, and then we'll have our own concerns through, say, our larger commercial projects on the as-built for the land and for residential plats. You know, what are the as-built for the land? How are we going to be able to use those in the future too, for needing to come into a drainage easement, for example? How do we know where everything is? And how has that been recorded too? Because we'll have the same thing. We'll have a group of people have changed out, there's attrition, someone else goes in and goes, oh, where did that go? And we'll have the same questions. Not as complex as the mechanical systems. I know how complex those are, but the other one I just threw out there too is just from past experience is assigning that responsibility. Just kind of throw it out there. Something cool we saw was a control program that used the project plans to land interactive icons for every single valve, every single piece of equipment throughout the entire building, multi-layers. So in operations, facility operations could, from their office, investigate any piece of equipment throughout the building and click on the O&M manual for that equipment to troubleshoot if needed before even going out and visiting that equipment. So that's kind of my question that I threw out to everyone. I know it's open-ended, but there are things out there that can use, again, those good PDFs. It doesn't have to be as complex. But then again, another project used the 3D model and did kind of the similar thing. And again, that was maybe a money is no object thing. You can spend the money on a contractor that can do that. But again, good stuff in produces good stuff out that people can use. And again, sharing that information throughout. If anyone can find it at any point in the project, you can assume that at the end, our owner could find it.
So that kind of takes us back to this whole concept of digital twin that we've been talking about, right? Is as you're designing the building, as you're building the building, the content, the data, because there's a distinct difference between content and data, right? Those things have to happen in concert, but also independently. And what we're talking about here is getting linked back to something. Concrete's the wrong word, but something tangible. Darren, you were just talking about linking documents to a specific place on the model. Where do they get linked from? There needs to be something, I'm going to use the word concrete, even though I don't think it's the right word, to tie it to. Tell me about what you were thinking in that comment.
Oh, I've often, thought of, there should be like some type of an escrow location that you could load that data to, so that the link stays and is permanent. I don't want my marketing department or IT to revamp our servers, or a manufacturer to revamp, or maybe they update the submittal, but I don't want the updated submittal. I want the submittal for the product I had installed.
Right.
It's real difficult. And I've seen a variety of facilities groups where they've got full-blown CAD teams that understand Revit and MicroStation very well. Then I've seen it was at the LA Community College District. They had a little dog and pony show of an FM system using MicroStation, and you could see the facilities guy, and he's just like, that looks cool, but I don't know how to run it. And then they somebody high up, and we're going to have all this stuff linked to the model. And then the contractors are like, well, that's going to add this much cost to go through and do all this linking. And you got a facilities guy there that says, I could patch a lot of drywall to find that valve for that cost. that's the reality. There's that financial reality, and you know, I just don't think there's a good understanding sometimes of what the owner really wants. I don't, you know, they're told by consultants just ask for everything or ask for these things, but you know, there's water on the floor. Do I send a roofer, plumber, or insulator? That's, you know, do I need a 10-foot ladder or a 6-foot ladder? Can I fit in that hole? Those are the problems those facilities guys are quite often trying to solve, and they can get to the answer sometimes quicker than trying to figure out how to manage this complex, you know, to find it in Revit, you know, if you, or you know, MicroStation, if you had a simplified interface for them. I mean, you know, look at all the gaming engines. You know, any kid can, you know, can navigate their way through some complex stuff that I can't even play anymore. But, you know, there's got to be a faster way for them to get the information without becoming an IT expert.
So if I'm waving the magic wand, your maintenance guy can walk into a mechanical room with HoloLens on and look at a particular pump, and just by using eye glance have a menu pop up. One of the items is the installation photo on day of installation. You look a little bit to the right, and then a menu pops up for the commissioning report or to the O&M manual or whatever. It sounds like that's the desired end state. I see some heads bobbing up and down, so it sounds like that's correct.
I don't even think it needs to be that fancy. You know, just scan a QR code and it, you know, my PDF pops up on the screen. Or so this was you know, Y2K. I did work for Excel Energy, and so all of their power plants, you know, they do all this non-destructive testing. And when their engineers go out in the field, they can, hey, I'm at Sherco Unit 3, boiler feed recirculation. Drawing pops up. I can pick on any piece of piping and it tells me when it was the testing procedures, the replacement history, the replacement process.
Right.
All of that stuff was done with just simple, you know, web images that were generated from CAD models. I did a lot of programming on the back end, but it was to take the data they already had. Their data was organized. It was in a database. They knew what the valve was named already.
Right.
They knew what the document, you know, and nobody in this world is ever that organized. We're too busy, you know, our money's tied up in materials and labor. And so we're running like hell to get that done. And, you know, the owner wants to be leasing the first floor before the roof is up.
Yeah.
So I actually think Jeff just hit it in the comments there. Yeah. It's not one model, not one tool, not one database. There's no way we're ever going to get to what is quote unquote common data environment. Everybody's going to get there, but you got to think about it as the ability to exchange the information back and forth consistently.
It's funny you should mention that.
But that's basically it of going through a design and construction process is how does that information, and Dennis touched on that with back in the day, they looked at BIM 360, Kobe, and into the CMMS as that transition process, that way to translate the information. But I think we also started talking about the idea of, well, do you just not ask for all the information? Is there a way to like manipulate it and get certain things that's easier to control, it's easier to get to, instead of saying, hey, we want everything in the BIM model. We just want 5 different, you know, parameters or key fields that are asked for each piece of equipment.
Yeah. So Dennis, pick 5, please.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack from what Darren said. You know, on one hand, there is so much information available now, and it is upsetting to know that so much detail has gone into design and into the model that we don't have access to on the operations side. But then there is the side of the house, the maintenance side, where maybe the guys wouldn't use all the information given, or actually, let me just step back for a minute. When I was at UTMB down in Galveston, a meeting invite hit my calendar for a 3D CAD demonstration, and had nothing else in it, which, by the way, I hate. Please put an agenda together if you're going to hold a meeting. But I went to the meeting, and an engineering firm showed up, and they brought in this really fancy laptop. I could tell it was definitely a gaming system at the time. I would value that laptop at about 10 grand. And so the guy sits down and he pulls up this really fancy model, and he shows a model of the actual central energy plant. And then he starts talking about how cool it is that he can show me where all the shutoff valves are. And my guys would be able to get them. And I said, you know, if my guys don't know where the damn shutoff valves are, I'll fire them. I mean, come on, you're in a plant, it's exposed equipment, and that is your job. So no, I don't need a 3D model of a central energy plant. My guys will get trained on it and they'll learn it very quickly, and we'll be able to share that information. What I do need from a regulatory perspective is information on the equipment I'm maintaining so that I can put together a preventative maintenance program. So I simply need an inventory of equipment. I need some nameplate data, a serial number, some basic information so that I can put in my system. And I need to be able to access an O&M manual because I need to know what the manufacturer suggests the maintenance procedures be. So I need to be able to link a procedure to a schedule to a piece of equipment and collect history on it. And unfortunately, guys, I don't get that. I don't know how to be any more basic in my requirements. Let's get that solved before we start looking at 3D models and showing me where all this stuff is, and let me hover my iPad over it so I can see behind the wall, put on some special glasses and walk my building. Sounds really cool, but let's just start with the basics. Once we get that solved, we can move on. And it's unfortunate that we've been talking about this for 25 years.
Not only that, but as a mechanical contractor, I could tell you, even though we're installing the equipment, we don't get information on the equipment when we're designing half the time. You know, we've got to allocate real estate and space and connections, and we've still got questions on, you know, equipment, you know, approvals.
I noticed that Michael had put in his chat about the building operations system and also commissioning. So that's another tactic we've taken, is a lot of the data we need would be at least viewed by a commissioning agent if we've got full commissioning as part of the contract. But unfortunately, because they're engineers and they think very highly of themselves, they charge quite a bit to actually give us that data. It's very interesting. I, on one of my new builds right now, have gone back to the software provider of my CMMS. And I kid you not, guys, the commissioning agent bid to give me the data I'm looking for was somewhere between 60 and 80 grand if I started chewing on it and trying to figure out what to do with it. The CMMS provider, he says he can do it in under $8,000. And I tend to believe him because I actually worked for a software vendor called Drawbase back in the day. I had helped implement a CMMS for the military called Demos. It's used in all military hospitals to this day. And I actually would take teams out into the field. I would spend no more than a week at a site, and I would complete an entire inventory of their equipment. I would set it up in the database, and I would give them training on it. So I know it can be done. I did it many years ago. I don't know why it's so difficult for us today in this digital age.
It's all about attitude, though. I mean, I think a lot of what you're pointing out, and I think a lot of the pains that you know, Daniel pointed out too, it's fundamental attitudes and business practice and cultures and expectations, and you know, well, this is the way we've always done it. Okay, but does it mean that the way you've always done it is the right way? And if the requirements are different and if the needs are different from the owners, then the service providers, doesn't matter whether they're architects and engineers or contractors or subcontractors, stop throwing up roadblocks for the requirements of the owners. It's as simple as that. And I think this is the catch-22 that happens, whether it's service providers and software companies that they use, or it's owners of buildings and facilities and the service providers they use, which is that end user has needs and requirements. Sometimes they don't always know absolutely positively what they need. Sometimes they're learning more and more and they're becoming sophisticated and they're learning what the marketplace has available to them. But I think what we really struggle with here, at least in the US, because it's the market I know the best, but it's not unusual. It happens in Europe too, is that a end user, a owner will express what they want and everybody else goes, nah, you don't really want that. No. I mean, we can't provide it anyway, so why the hell would you want it? Instead of saying, oh, okay, so let's go get it done. And if I look at any other industry, the industry says, oh, how do I go get that done? But in the building industry, we continually beat down the end user and the owner so that we don't make it more difficult for us as service providers, whether you're on the design side or the building delivery, project delivery side, or you're on the software side, to not meet those requirements. Now, I'm not saying everybody is like that, but I'm saying the overwhelming majority of the atmosphere of the way things are done, that's what happens.
So what I found is that in my experience, the GC is the glue that keeps everything together. We had been trying to get BIM included into our standards forever, and it wasn't until the GCs learned that they could actually build the buildings more smart by using BIM. They were the ones to push it, not the architects. And so I am curious, Danielle, to hear your viewpoint now from the GC. How do you put this together and how do you meet the end user's requirements?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, and it goes back to the point about not one tool, not one model, right? And I think one thing that always happens for us, it seems, is that as we're reading through owner requirements, execution plans, BIM standards, whatever it is, it always seems to be this like finger pointing thing where like, oh, the design team owns it to this point, and then the contractors take it over, and then they're responsible for collecting all that data from their subs. It's a struggle, I think, with inconsistency among, contract documents and everything we're working with too. We're trying to interpret, but we're not asking the question of the right people who could probably interpret it a lot easier and quicker for us. Instead, we're just trying to get together. It's like the GC. Yes, we're gonna use BIM regardless. We're gonna use it for coordination, especially on our complex projects, even our smaller projects. So, I think in some ways to look at the opposite end of what Jeffrey said, like we're trying to sell a Cadillac, and the owner's like, no, we don't need that. We don't need that product because we don't have the tools to use it. We don't have Revit. We don't have folks in-house who can even open the file, right? So I think we struggle to figure out like while we can pull all of this information together and we can take everything that we get from our subcontractors and give you the best damn model that you could use, we're not asking the question, are you actually going to use this? How are you going to maintain it? Do you have people in-house who can even open the file and update it if things change? Does it integrate with your CMMS? Like there just needs to be more conversation.
Yeah, I think that ties to the question that you just asked, but Jacob, hit your thing first, and then we'll jump back to Darren.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think Dennis put it real quick and easy too, is it's all about an asset registry, and coming out of it, they need to know what's in that building and how do they put their information to it as it continues to grow. And it's like everybody in the design construction industry just saw BIM as that perfect way to do it and said, oh, this is great. We can put information to an asset. But we all pushed it into trying to say, hey, the facility manager should do this too, when they're sitting there with a laptop from 2004, the compact that still, has the old Outlook on it. And there's never a chance that they're going to be able to get that to that point, but where do we still give them what they need? And that's basically your asset registry. How do we make sure we compile it correctly, getting it out of design and construction?
So Darren, you asked about the percent of owners that really even want the data. So just quick, ask the question properly to Danielle, and let's get the GC's perspective. How much is actually getting used?
Good question. I think in some ways the owners want the data. They don't want the models that come with it. I think the majority of the owners we work with definitely want the data in some format. It's inconsistent again as to what format that is if they have a system in place, and it depends on the owner. So even like for our commercial development team, for example, they are these, you know, glamorous owners, and they don't have requirements for any of this stuff. So, and a lot of that is because they divest the properties after they've built them. So they have all these ideas about innovation and technology and how they can incorporate these things into their projects, but at the end of the day, they don't really care. So it's, you know, it's dependent on, yeah, the type of owner, but I think the data is valuable to everybody. It's just not the other things that come with it.
So Kelly, one of the issues that we have is define owner, because I deal with this all the time. Planning, design, and construction is the owner as far as the GC and everybody else is concerned. They're the ones paying the bills. They're the ones giving the directions. They're the ones with the project managers. But I'm the one who's maintaining all the infrastructure. I'm the one who's painting the walls, replacing the wall covering, unclogging the toilets, doing all the water leaks. I mean, we own the roof. I mean, everything that building is, when it's done and handed over, we're the ones that own it and maintain it. But yet, if you look at planning, design, and construction, it's all about upfront costs, schedule, and the scope. And if you increase any one of them, they flip a lid. And when we come to the table and we say we want X, Y, and Z, they flip a lid.
So for my, there's two divided teams, at least with our members. We're dealing with a lot of the Fortune 500 companies that have a capital projects team and a facilities team, and they don't talk. So knowing what one hand wants, the other hand might not use. So Danielle, you were talking about data, and they all want data. They don't necessarily want the models. They all want data, but they don't necessarily know how to use it. So it's great to have the data, but unless you, who wants to look through stacks and stacks of books like we talked about earlier? So I think a lot of it's education to the owner's perspective, what they should be asking for. So Jeffrey, you had mentioned we talk them out of things. Sometimes we should try to talk them into things so they know on the front end on what the return on investment is, what they should be asking for the long term. So and Darren, you had said that they build one and done. A lot of our companies that I work with that are members of CURT are building plants year over year after year. Merck Pharmaceuticals, they're in the billions for their capital spend. It keeps going up due to COVID. They're trying to build and ramp up. These facilities are going to be used for 50 years plus. They're building them for a long time. One of the other challenges is all this data. So we link to a website. I think about maintenance to that. That could be a nightmare if you're linking to a website and something gets bought out. So where do you put all this? Do you put it on the cloud? Is it a PDF? But yeah, the longevity of these projects and how do you communicate between the capital project side and the operation and maintenance side is crucial.
So an angle that I take is being in healthcare. I have a phrase that I've called survey ready day one. So in order for us to get insurance from CMS, reimbursables from Medicaid and Medicare, we have to be accredited. And in order to maintain accreditation, we have to be surveyed and we have to pass those surveys. So there's a lot of documentation that's required in those surveys. And so it goes back to regulatory compliance, it goes back to safety. But the issue is, if I'm survey ready day one, that means I have all the documentation ready on day one, not 6 months after the project, not a year after the project, not when the other teams have left. And I've been down that road too, Danielle, where I've tried to hold money from them, and their guys are already billable against multiple other projects. So they can leave that money on the table. The piece that they leave for that is peanuts compared to the overall project.
Yeah, we struggled with that. So I worked for Massport, who owns and operates Logan Airport, and my job was also collecting all of our as-built and all of the data associated with that. And we would wait sometimes 2 years. And for anyone that's traveled through an airport, you know how frequently things change there, whether it's, you know, we're renovating departure gates or the concessions within the airport. And that was constantly an issue. So it's a real struggle. I understand both sides of it for sure.
Yeah, you do have to have more savvy owners. We have to be savvier consumers of things, right? And, you know, that's the other side of what I was saying before is, you know, sure, the owners can make demands, and you pointed that out, you know, correctly, Rob, is, you know, sometimes there has to be that dialogue that actually talks owners into doing more. But, you know, I think you also pointed out, and, you know, and I think Dennis points out too, is this idea of, well, not all owners are the same, right? But I think as consumers of whatever it is that we need, we do have to be better at understanding what it is that we're looking for, what way we need. You know, I think that's, you know, interesting to have, you know, two teams that are all part of the same organization, and yet they have two totally different perspectives, and then don't communicate with each other as how each other's job affects the other one and the results. And, you know, those are the types of things that a GC can't come in and solve, and a technology provider can't even come in and solve. The owner has to solve that themselves, right, internally.
We're somewhere under a minute, so they're going to cut us off at some point here in the next few seconds. So I want to thank everybody for their input today. This has been a truly dynamic conversation. I think we took a lot out of it, and we'll look to share that knowledge with folks in you know, within this group and extend to the greater industry. That's the value of putting these videos up for folks to consume and get these conversations moving in the right direction. We'll also catalog the information out of the chats, so that way it's part of the conversation as well. So appreciate everybody's participation today. You know, that kind of wraps up the formal part of the breakout room, not knowing when Nathan is going to pull us back in. He's texting right now. Let's see what he's gonna.
Well, while we're waiting, Jeff, you brought up a good point, and what I tell everybody from a project management perspective, facilitation is an art, and it's an art that everybody needs to learn. So if you can facilitate those conversations, if you can bring the right players to the table, at least you can get a good start on trying to put this thing together and map it out for everybody. And that's a great service to be able to provide.
Yep. Yeah. Talking to each other is so hard. That was one of the most frustrating things I had when I was in practice. And, you know, just getting everybody to sort of come to a table and say, well, I don't know anything, you know. And when I was at Vectorworks, when I was at Vectorworks, I decided towards the end, I said, you know, you guys, my job is to be the dumbest guy in the room. I have to assume I know nothing, and I have to ask questions of everybody to figure out what everybody wants, and then turn around and relay that back and say, is this what you meant? And if I get that right, then I can explain to somebody else from, say, a user's point of view to an engineer's point of view, and from an engineer's point of view to a user's point of view, what's going on.
That's the comment I made earlier about everybody bringing their own viewpoint to the table. I was highly successful in managing IT projects because I knew nothing about them, to your point. So I asked a lot of questions. And you want to talk to people who don't like to talk to people, talk to data modelers. They hate talking to people. And you have to engage them. You have to bring them into the project. They're necessary to the team. And you learn very quickly how to have those conversations, how to bring people together. And it was great because I could ask stupid questions. I'm like, I'm not an IT guy, so I need to understand how this works.
Yeah, and I think it's always hard because, you know, from the software point of view too, a lot of engineers don't necessarily know which questions to ask. And, you know, and that can be difficult. You know, my role at the software company was to be an intermediary, was to help the engineers understand, well, what were the workflows? How were the tools being used, or how should they be used? Because they didn't know, and they weren't always necessarily in a good position to do the research to figure that out. Because like you said, because of who they are and what and type of people they were like, well, give me a problem and I know I can code a problem. I know I can code a solution. It might not be elegant to the end user, but it works. And then you have to sort of get through that and get people to understand was, okay, well then how do I take your idea of, I know I can get a solution to work, to, well, here's how I actually solve the problem for the end user who had the question in the first place, or had the problem in the first place. And
when we were creating the software for the military, one of the software developers impressed the crap out of me because he came in the room and I could have sworn he was a facility manager. He was talking about it just like he had been in the business. And I'm like, that's the guy you want on your team. You know, he understands the business, and now he understands the IT side, so he can put it together for us.
Mm-hmm. How many contractors turn people over to facilities management on the projects that they use?
Oh, you talking about people working on after you're gone?
Yeah. I mean, I hear anecdotally, and I hear once in a while. I know up here at Baylor, you know, was it Flintco that did Baylor? They had people do it. So I'm just curious, is like how often that happens? Because I know in other,
I can tell you, I
other
try
countries
very hard, but I don't get a lot of people because the contractors keep them. But now there are people that don't like the hours. They want to settle down into a 9 to 5. We can get them to convert at that point. But those guys that are getting paid overtime and enjoy it, they want to stay where they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a turnover package on every one of our projects if for anyone that wants it. That being said, you know, we own the maintenance on several buildings in Seattle that we've built, and 2 years later, we probably don't have as-builts anymore. So I don't have all the answers either. I'm working on it.
Yeah, and that's another question: is how often does that happen, and shouldn't it happen more? And you know, I think it also speaks to the diversity of business models for the building and the ownership of the building and the development of the building, and how in some cases it's easy to do it that way, but in a lot of cases it's hard to do. And you know, those are the questions I'm struggling with now and trying to formulate, you know, like how do you frame those discussions that says, well, maybe we encourage too many bad business models that allow these poor results to occur, because the developers can get in and get out, and they just leave with their money and their investors' money, and then nobody cares. And then, you know, the rest of the people are left holding the bag. So how do you discourage that? Do you discourage it from a business practice point of view? Do you discourage it from a lending point of view? Do you discourage it from a legal point of view and, you know, regulatory method? Is it taxation? Is it, you know, how do you rework these issues at an even higher level, so that then you don't have these problems that keep trickling down and down and down and down into, you know,
a lot of people. How many of these folks were mid-sentence when that happened?
I try and provide warnings every time, and then every.
Moving on next is digital twin, the as-built dumpster dive. Probably my favorite part of a project, because as long as you're transitioned before as-built are due, you don't have to worry about it.
It's a very selfish view of it, Dan.
That is a great way to put it. So, you know, we've had a series of conversations around digital twin, and they've bounced back and forth between the early stages and the later stages, and we keep jumping over this chasm, this divide around what goes on at the end of the process for a GC and how that drives to the handover to the owner. So Danielle, one of our subject matter experts, had this great saying she called as-built dumpster diving. So what is it? Well, you get to about 6 weeks out from the end of the project, and all of a sudden you start scrambling to try to put stuff together, only to find that the subject matter experts that were on the project are now already on billable resources on other projects and have no incentive to help in the process. So they cobble together what they can and they send it off to the owner and hope that it's going to be enough. And now what ends up happening from the owner's perspective, Dennis gave us some perspective there from his role in facilities maintenance for Atrium Health, is they end up looking for a needle in the haystack. And he relayed a story back to one of his previous positions with USAA, where they were looking for an operations manual for Chiller 4. Right, so he asked one guy and said, can you search this? And they search for Chiller 4 and they can't find anything. So he grabs some other guy on the team who then says, oh yeah, I know where to look for that. And he looks up this information using the project manager's name and some sublocation of where it was in the building to finally figure out where to find that particular document, only to find out that it was 1,200 pages long and it was non-indexed, non-searchable. So now you have to dumpster dive within the dumpster to find the information that you need. So this ends up having an impact on the basically the longest part of the building's life cycle, right? How do they get to this information. So there's an incentive to try to build this into that digital twin where there's a relationship between the data that you need, the content that you need, and physical assets and locations in the building. So how and when do we address this? How do we make this better? Well, there is a general consensus from multiple folks that we need to get folks to the table earlier. Really define those actual requirements with facilities maintenance involved in the conversation, not just some people, right? The other important thing is to understand the systems that they're trying to tie together, right? And what do we have the ability to bring together in data, and where do we have content? And the folks that are advising the teams on how to do this, you have consultants telling folks, get everything you can, you're creating a bigger dumpster. So let's define and more tailor those requirements, because there was a story that Dennis told about within healthcare. You need to be ready for survey. So you need to be survey ready on day one. In order for them to bill insurance companies for health-related things that happen inside of medical facilities, that facility needs to be accredited. So you need to have everything together, everything about your building, everything you need to pass that survey ready for day one. It's not 6 months after the project is over when you finally get around to sending some stuff. What we think can help that is that owners want more data. They want the data more than the model, because the data is what helps them populate the facility maintenance solutions, their software, and also this digital twin concept. The models are good, but they really need the data. So there's some two things we focused on after that. One is process change, and the other is incentive change. What can we do to make it work better? I think a few people if they couldn't have shook their heads up and down any harder without getting a headache, to say that we need to stop making 1,000-plus page PDF documents without an index or searchability. It doesn't do anybody any good. It's just an easy way to hand the ball over to someone and say, not my problem anymore. But let's get down to the basics. It would be great to be able to have someone walk through the maintenance room and look through their HoloLens and do all that kind of fun stuff. But how about let's just starting with an asset register that we can have links to the manuals and make it that much better. And the final thing for the incentive change is decoupling the data. You're not going to use one tool. You're not going to have one model. This is a compilation, a system of systems that we have to bring together. So let's decouple the data from those systems, and that way the folks can use that data, sorry, with the appropriate tool. So that's where we got to by the end of the conversation. It's another fruitful one. Look forward to the next in the conversation about digital twins.
Appreciate it, Kelly.